You're listening to the Integrative Health Simplified podcast with Kari, Coody, pharmacist turned integrative health practitioner. Here we talk all things straightforward and honest when it comes to holistic health and simplifying your best steps forward while eliminating all the gimmicks and confusion. Leave the overwhelm at the door and get ready for impactful action steps that get to the real root of your issue and actually move the needle in your health. Let's dive into the show. Hey there, and welcome back into the Integrative Health Simplified podcast. I'm Kari, Coody, your host, and we are continuing a series entitled Women's Health, Fact or Fiction. And I hope you've enjoyed the episodes previous to this one. If you haven't listened, if this is your first episode, first of all, welcome. But if you have not listened to the previous episodes in this series, I would encourage you to do so before moving on. Maybe after you listen to this one, pause and go back and listen to some of the previous ones, because we are unpacking things that we hear as women, maybe as we get older. These things are this is just what happens, right? And so I really wanted to speak into that because I find that oftentimes it's discouraging and we just kind of don't necessarily look to see what the deeper issue or root cause issue is with some of our symptoms because we think they are normal. But while they're common, they might not be normal. So that's sort of what we've been digging into in this series. And so in this specific episode, I wanted to talk to the term clean eating or eating clean. I hear that a lot. I work with a lot of women that will put that on their intake form whenever they sign up to work with me and they're filling out this in-depth intake form. They will just put like, I eat clean. And so I wanted to talk about this because I do hear it a lot. And I feel like sometimes we think this way of eating, clean eating, will solve all of our health issues. And the fact that maybe we can't seem to stick with it is the reason why we are having these health issues that we're having, the symptoms or whatnot. And so I just wanted to speak into that because I actually looked up what clean eating sort of means, like the definition of it. And this is what I found. It said, generally, clean eating is assumed to refer to foods that are as close to their natural state as possible. They might be organic, and most likely their minimal use of chemical additives and preservatives in their food. So that's kind of what I found as like a general definition. So that sounds pretty good. Yes, like as close to the natural state as possible, like least processed, probably organic, like all that sounds great. But what I find is that clean eating often means an entirely different thing from that definition. So I get that it can mean different things for different people, but here's what I see the most. And I believe it's because culture has kind of taken this to the extreme. And so when most people say they're eating clean, this is what they mean. They're eating minimal carbs, they're eating no dairy, they're eating sugar-free, and they're eating lots of vegetables. Now, I get that they're probably eating other things rather than those, but this is kind of the things that they've cut out and the things that they're focusing on when it falls under the term clean eating. And so also to add to that, most of the time they're under eating calories in general. And so I kind of wanted to just unpack each one of these and just discuss maybe my thoughts on them and just something to consider if you do feel like, if I could just continue to eat this way, if I could just continue this clean eating, then like X, Y, and Z symptom, this is the issue, right? Is that I can't stick with this type of eating. So let's unpack. Minimal carbs. That's the first thing I mentioned. So if you have not listened to episode 9 in this podcast, go back and listen to that because I talked about how carbs aren't the enemy. I think that oftentimes from the different diets we have done in the past or just, hearing different things, maybe on the internet or whatnot, it is a way that people can lose weight quickly. It's just a way that a lot of people tend to diet is to cut carbs. And so I talk about specifically in that episode in depth about how they aren't the enemy. And honestly, women in particular need carbs, specifically for the endocrine system to function properly, which that would just entail a lot in that one system. But you think about hormones being off, women need carbs for hormone production and for hormone regulation. Very, very important. And just for energy in general. If you're feeling fatigued, I want you to look to see what kind of carbs That's really key. I talk about that in that episode also. But what kind of carbs and how many of those carbs are you consuming in a day's time? So next is no dairy. So again, I'm kind of referring you back to some episodes so that you can get a little bit here, but if you want more information, you can refer back to these episodes. So the dairy episode is 13, and I talk about how it kind of has gotten a bad rap, and there are a lot of different forms of dairy. So go back and check out that episode if you want more information on that. But dairy as a whole is incredibly nutrient dense, and it has a ton of different micronutrients that a lot of other foods don't have. And so I get, maybe you can't digest dairy properly. There's a reason for that. So that's something that you might want to, work with somebody to uncover the reason why you can't digest it properly. And I feel like that's worth searching for because it is such a nutrient dense food. And it has a lot of beneficial nutrients that are specific for female physiology in specific. So that's something that often is cut out. And we also have to think about, if we're cutting out dairy, what are we replacing it with? Because oftentimes that brings in a lot of like oat milk and almond milk and things, maybe even soy, that are highly processed and that can contain other things that we really don't want, like preservatives and things like that. So just something to consider. And those things lack nutritional density. That's one of the big things that I think I didn't understand for a really long time, is that those dairy alternatives are not nearly as nutrient dense as the actual dairy itself. So that's something that I see often. And so continuing to just unpack this clean eating that I see the most. So next is sugar-free. So sugar has definitely become an enemy in the recent years, and I totally get it. I talk a lot about this in episode 15. So again, refer back to that for additional information and kind of my thoughts on it. But I just think that when we think of sugar, we think of anything sweet, and all sugar is not created equal. And so I talk about that in that episode. Corn syrup is not sugar. It's sweet, but it's not the same thing. And so there's also different things with sugar alternatives that can be replaced. Obviously, if you're trying to not eat as much sugar, you might be replacing it with sugar alternatives that can kind of trick the body into thinking that it's going to get glucose for energy because that's what it uses sugar for. And then it doesn't get that. So it's kind of confused, our body is. So there are lots of different things that can happen when we just cut out all sugar. And one of the main things that I feel is a detriment, especially to women, is that we aren't really giving our body the glucose that it needs to make energy and to run all of its processes off of. And so, especially if we're not eating a lot of carbs, right? If we're coupling sugar-free, very low carbs, where are we getting glucose from? We have to kind of think about that. That's the way our body wants to make energy and get energy from, is our food, glucose from our food, which comes from carbs, and it can come from sugar sources also. And so it can make its own, it can make its own energy, but it takes stress hormones to do that. And so I talk more about this in episode 1, if you want to kind of learn a little bit more about that whole process of how our body makes energy if it's not getting it from food. So sugar-free is definitely, could be a lot more episodes on the podcast. So let me know if you want more information on that. But those are just some thoughts on going sugar-free, which is what I see a lot happen when we think of clean eating. So lastly, that I mentioned was eating a lot of vegetables. And so listen, I'm not hating on vegetables. I think vegetables are great, but I think somewhere along the way, we think that they're the most nutrients dense thing we can consume. And so I actually break this down in episode 14 and just give you a lot of different, things to think about that you might not have thought about before. And so another thing to think about lots of veggies is oftentimes they're hard on our digestive system. I talk about this in that episode also, and they can cause issues in that area. And so just making sure they're properly prepared and that they're well balanced with other foods like protein and carbs, that is very important when we think about getting a good variety for our body to have what it needs to function properly. And so when we focus on clean eating, another issue, and this might be the biggest issue of all, is that we have this all or nothing approach to eating. We think if we don't stay on this clean eating journey, then we're just, that's our issue. That's our main issue, is that we just can't stay in eating this way, and that we fall off the wagon, and it's just this whole cycle. And then it sort of comes back to willpower. Like, we just don't have enough willpower. I don't have enough discipline to stay on, this type of eating. But what I found so much, and I talk about why cravings matter in a previous episode also that you can go check out, is that our body is always talking to us. So if you find it really hard to stay on this way of eating, or really any other way of eating that cuts out a lot of things, it's probably because your body is missing something. It's probably because your body's trying to tell you something, and it's less about you not having enough willpower and discipline. And so I think that this whole thought of, I just need to eat this certain way and it's going to solve all my health issues, I also think that it can really take our focus off of other things that can really help our health as well, like movement and rest and stress management. And we just miss out on joy in our everyday because we're so focused on doing this one thing that we think is going to fix all of our problems. And so I think it goes back to this all or nothing approach, honestly, that we've often fallen into when we think of being healthier. We think of all our symptoms are going to go away if I can just do these things. And so it's just not sustainable. And it's as I've kind of walked through with you, it's not something that is really even beneficial for our body long term. Now, I'm not saying that some of these things couldn't be beneficial short term. Surely they could. However, I think this is a thought process that is ongoing. We just think if we could stick with this, that all of our problems are going to be solved when it comes to our health. And I just don't think that's the issue for most people. There are often other root causes that are playing into some of these things that we should consider as well. So usually it's not just one thing that's the issue of and the cause of your symptoms. It's typically a variety of maybe shifts and edits that you might need to make so that your body has what it needs and it can run properly and it can begin to detox like we want it to. That's a lot of our issue, is that our body can't detox properly because it doesn't have what it needs. And that can kind of play out in some of the ways that I've already mentioned and kind of chatted through with this episode with you. So, I've actually seen this play out in my own health as well. And so I've done so many different ways of eating and different protocols and things like that in the past, and I was still having digestive issues. And one of the things that I realized was I was eating way too many vegetables, raw vegetables, and I wasn't getting enough glucose in my diet in the form of carbs, in the form of fruit, and also in the form of some sugar. I think that can be beneficial in smaller amounts. I'm not saying we need to go out and eat all the cookies or eat all the cakes. Oftentimes, like I talk about in episode 15, it's what the sugar is paired with. And so fruit, I think as a whole, is the most nutrient dense way that we can consume carbs because it has a ton of different minerals in fruit. And so don't shy away from these things because you've heard and you maybe have experienced in different diets that you've done, and they've cut out some various things like carbs in the form of like root vegetables or fruits, because your body needs those to function. And so when I was not consuming enough of those, my liver was like crying out, like, I don't have enough glucose in my body, in its detox processes, they just weren't working properly because they didn't have the fuel that they needed. So I just share all this with you to say, I think we're all so individual. And so hopefully something I have said in this episode really triggered you okay, maybe I need to think about this in a different way, because oftentimes it's our mindset around things that are holding us back. It's not necessarily that we need more willpower, we need more discipline. We might not even need a specific plan for us. Sometimes we just are always looking for these things, but we have a lot of what we need. It's just this mindset thing. And so let me know. I would love to know if you have any thoughts or comments or questions about what I've shared on this episode. And if you're liking this series, let me know. If you would feel so inclined and feel like people need to know this, please share this episode, out via email or social media or whatever way would be easiest for you. Share it with your friends and family. And I'm just so thankful to have these conversations with you guys and just to share this information on this platform. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you on the next episode. If this episode has served you in any way, I would love it if you'd share any aha moments or takeaways over on Instagram and tag me at Kari Coody. And if you haven't already, hit the subscribe button so we can continue to learn and grow together.